Ever since 4K webcams hit the marketplace, well, I've had this crazy dream that one day I'd be able to use a webcam as a studio camera. Now, I know that sounds crazy, and if I'm honest, every single 4K webcam I tested in the past fell short in terms of video quality. Well, today I'm happy to report the camera we're testing out, well, this thing not only looks really good, but also rivals that of the quality of a mirrorless camera. So this is the SmartCam S800, and I wanted to thank the folks over at eMeet for sending this over. But honestly, this was a camera that I was looking at. This was the only webcam on the marketplace that I saw that carried a 1/2-inch Sony sensor. And you heard that right. This thing has a Sony sensor on board, and I was really excited to get my hands on this. So let's take a look at what's in the box. Okay, looks like right here we have the camera. Next to that, looks like we have a box. In this box, we have a USB cord, and then a manual, and then a product guide, probably a quick start guide here. Pretty nice, actually. Well done on that. Let's look at the camera again. Looks like a really quality camera. Now remember, this is a 4K camera. It shoots in 4K 30 frames per second, but also does 1080 60 frames per second. So I know some of the gamers like to have the 60 frames per second on their web cameras, just to match probably their overall resolution when they're recording their games. As I mentioned, it does have that Sony 1/2-inch sensor in it, but that also means it is a f1.8. It is a 71 millimeter equivalent. It does have 4x zoom on it, and overall the quality feels really good. It looks like it's made out of a nice plastic. On top, it also has a privacy shield where you can shut that down, and I appreciate that being built in. It sits upon this little tripod. If you can see here, this is just clips on your monitor. And then it also includes a 1/4-inch thread. So if you're looking to put this down on something, you'll be able to do that as well. Can't say much other than it is bigger than I thought it would be, but that's okay. It's probably spot on in terms of kind of like what I would expect from something like this for the weight. All that's left now is we just need to plug in the USB-C, and we'll start doing some testing on this. Okay, once you finish plugging the S800 into the back of your computer via a USB-C, well, it is time to download the software. If you don't have that software, it will be linked down below. Just easily install it and finish the setup. Now, one of the things you'll want to note if you don't see this picture, you want to make sure that the S800 up here is selected. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see this preview switch. If it looks something like this, well, that means that the preview switch is off and you just need to turn that on. Once you turn it on, you'll get your picture. So those are the two things you want to check right away. One of the other things I want to address right up front is the fact that in this software, there is no way to tell or to adjust it from 1080 to 4K or from 30 frames per second to 60 frames per second. There is absolutely no way to do that in this software itself. So right now you're actually looking at a 1080 image, unfortunately, because there's nothing I can do in this software to change that. Now on the left-hand side, we do have some other things to take a look at. First, we have the settings. Now this isn't the settings for the camera. This is actually pretty meager settings for the software. Down below that, we have a messaging center. Then we have a way to contact support. Then we have the ability to log in if you want to register your S800 with eMeet. All right, now that we're back on the main display, let's move over to these top buttons. First is the microphone noise reduction. I am currently not using the microphone on the webcam itself, but we will test that after I get through the other settings. Then we have a preview switch. What you saw just turns on and off this preview here. To the right is kind of where all the settings that you have access to for the camera itself. And the first thing that we can do is actually add some grid lines. First, we can do the rule of thirds. Then we could also select golden ratio. There's also crosshairs to keep things in the center. And then lastly, we have the square. This is actually quite useful for me. Let's say I was going to do a long form, but eventually I was going to turn it into like a YouTube short. Well, this way I could make sure that when I'm doing this video with these grid lines, I could make sure I'm relatively in frame. Then you have the metering mode. Now metering is just going to be the area it focuses on when it's deciding how to do its exposure automatically. This is the center metering. This is global metering. This is spot metering, and this is face metering. I think I'll probably just keep it on the face metering. Focus, kind of the same deal. It's going to focus on your central, and then over here, it's going to focus on your face. I just noticed that this is on, so let me turn that off. Down below the focus, you actually have autofocus, and you can actually turn that off. So if you wanted to do manual focus, you could do that. I'll leave it on for now. One of the cool things also about focus is the fact that this thing, autofocus, is pretty darn good. You can see here, if I take this away and put it up, how fast it does that auto focusing and kind of fades out the background there. So I really do like this. I think it's pretty cool in terms of the auto focusing. Now, some of that is because it has a Sony sensor inside of this. It's a 1/2-inch Sony sensor, and it has some of that technology, I assume. So that autofocus is probably just a result of that sensor they're using and probably some mechanics that they have in the camera itself. The other thing is it has a low aperture of f1.8, so it can easily blur out the background there. Really solid in that regard. Below that, we have the ability to zoom. You can see here, you can zoom in and out. Then we have video settings. This is where we can change the look of what we're seeing now. Now, this is what it looks like out of the box, and to be honest with you, I like the way it looks. I think this is actually pretty impressive. It's not that light in here, and this camera is really holding up, and as far as I can see on this little tiny screen. There are some things you can do to change it though. For instance, you could make it into HDR. This is an example of HDR. Let it focus in here, get its bearings. So this is what it would look like if you're interested in that high dynamic range look, or HDR. I'll turn that off for right now. So then we have some different types of video coloring. Think of these kind of like filtering. This is their standard. Then they have something called portrait. And this is portrait. Doesn't look, this doesn't look too bad. I may use this or standard. Then we have object. Object is completely over sharpened, but maybe it's so that when you do this, maybe it looks a little bit better. I don't know. Below that, we have vivid. That's just going to be a bit more saturated, a bit more poppy. And then below that, we have bright, which would be just an overall brighter image. Out of all these, I think I probably just prefer the standard mode straight out of the box. Perhaps portrait if I'm feeling a little funky there. I don't think this looks too bad. Looks kind of like that cinematic look. So right now, we'll just put it back to standard. Then we have one last option, and that is the customization, where you can change things like brightness, contrast, sharpness, saturation, tone, and auto balance. You can also set the anti-flicker, and we can also adjust these, make it a little bit brighter, make it a little bit more contrasty, whatever you want to do, which I appreciate. But one of the things that I noticed, which is interesting, is the fact that if I move this up, it gets super bright quick. If I move it back down, it gets more natural. But if I move it down, which would be darker one more, you'll notice it actually lights it up. So this slider seems to be a little bit wonky and off. You can also adjust the contrast. You can get it really contrasty. We'll bring that down just a hair. The sharpness, this gets really sharp really quick, so be very careful with this one. Saturation, maybe we'll bring that saturation up a little bit. Tone, I won't mess with. And then auto white balance, I typically keep this as auto just because I know that this is in a pretty controlled environment. So yeah, I think that this is just fine with the auto white balance. Now you can turn this off. One of the things I will say, if I move it to the left, it's going to get a lot cooler, but that's moving towards the yellow, so you would think that would be warmer, but it's actually not. Same thing, if I move it towards the blue, it's actually going to get warmer, not cooler. So I think those are just reversed. Let me go back to standard coloring. I think this is all right, and I like the picture here, but some of those things are really frustrating. But before we go into that stuff, let's just quickly address the microphone noise reduction. I'm now going to switch it over to the microphone on board to the webcam itself. We'll switch off this noise reduction, then we'll switch it back on to see if it makes any difference. Okay, now we're using the onboard microphone without any noise reduction. How does this sound? Are you hearing anything in the background? I do have a computer running in the background. I wonder if it could pick it up. I am about 3.5 feet away from the microphones or the webcam, and that's about 1 meter for those of you that don't live in the United States. So how does it sound without the noise reduction? Now we'll go ahead and turn on the noise reduction. Did you notice a difference? How does this sound? Is it removing some, I think my heat is probably on. We also have those computers back there. Has it done anything to like isolate my voice, for example? How does this sound with the noise reduction on? So after listening to both of those myself, I think the noise reduction on is probably a better way to go. Obviously, it's not going to be a great microphone. So if you are worried about your sound, get yourself something like this, or, you know, some other type of mic that's a little bit closer, and, you know, you can make a little bit more adjustments. If you're super worried about audio quality, just know that it's a good microphone, but it's not great. Now, in regards to the software, it's really easy to use. I don't have a problem with it. I do question some of the slider issues we found. I also really don't like the fact that I can't go into the settings and select which frame rate I want, or any of that stuff. So I think that's a drawback as well. But overall, I think the video quality looks really, really, really good, and I'm really happy about the way this looks. The eMeet S800 is a very capable camera, and I think it all starts with their smart decision to include a Sony half-inch sensor in this webcam. That's not only going to produce beautiful looking footage, but it's also going to give us the ability to shoot in a low f1.8 aperture. That's going to give us awesome low light abilities that a lot of us are looking for in a studio camera. But it's not all rainbows and butterflies. Unfortunately, we did find some very serious things wrong with the software. But my hope is that eMeet will hear this and they'll release a software and firmware update that addresses some of these issues that we found with the software. But even if it didn't have software at all, well, I got to be honest with you, I would still buy this camera. Not only is it inexpensive, coming in on sale just a little over $100, and heck, even if you had to pay full retail at $150, I still think this is a huge value for what you're getting. Whether you are a streamer or you're just doing things like online meetings for work or like FaceTime with your family and you want to look really good, I think there's a lot of value with this camera. And in fact, so much value that I wouldn't hesitate to do what I'm doing now, filming a YouTube video with this webcam. You should 100% buy this camera. And in fact, it is my favorite webcam of 2024 so far. I just can't get over how close this looks to a mirrorless camera. So if you're looking for a good quality webcam, well, look no further than the eMeet S800. And of course, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer each and every one of you. If you found value in this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. My name's Hill Phantom, and I'll see you next time.